You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.
I'm excited about this as a fellow keynote speaker. I want to hear this gal, the commissioner of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the Honorable Summer Mersinger. Let's hear it for Summer!
Well, good morning. That was a very energetic introduction, and I'm not used to that much energy in the morning, so I'm grateful because now I feel like I can tackle the day a little bit more. But it's a pleasure to be here today. I know this is the 41st annual Options Industry Conference, so it's a pleasure to see all of you. It's great to be in the room and have people in person. I think the Zoom speeches and the team speeches are getting a little old, so I much prefer being in a room with everyone. And I also just want to quickly congratulate the Options Clearing Corporation because I believe this is our 50th year since their founding. So 50 years is a pretty big achievement, especially in such a rapidly changing industry. So congrats to OCC as well. So because we're in Music City, I could not resist, and I decided that I was going to base my speech around one of my favorite country songs. So before I get to that, I do have to give my standard disclaimer that the remarks I make today are my own. They do not necessarily reflect the entire commission or my fellow commissioners. So with that out of the way, I thought I would kind of base everything on Brad Paisley's song, Welcome to the Future. It might have been a while since any of you heard that song. I actually had to re-listen to it. I remembered the words, but I didn't really remember the sound. So I listened to it again, but the words are great because it talks about things that we can all relate to. So at the beginning of the song, he's talking about when he was 10 years old and how he used to sit in an 8-hour car ride and wish he could just watch television. And how he would have to ride his bike to the arcade because if he wanted to play Pac-Man. But now that's all on your phone. And I just think it's an interesting thing to think about of how far we've come. I'm sure many of you felt the same way when you were younger, sitting in your car, going on long car trips, whether you were reading a book or literally just staring out the window, thinking to yourself, if I could just watch a movie or watch TV, this would go so much faster. And it's a way of life now. Honestly, I have 4 kids, so the idea of having 4 kids in a car going on a road trip without a TV, I don't think we'd go anywhere. So I am very grateful for technology and innovation, especially when you think of it as trying to be a parent and doing the best you can. So what I do want to talk about today, because I am going to sit down and do a fireside chat with Julie Bauer from the OCC. So we're going to get into a lot of topics. She's going to ask me a lot of hard questions, and I'm looking forward to that chat, mostly because then I can let Julie do like 50% of the talking, and then I only have to do 50% of the talking, which is always a nice break. But I did want to talk about technology and innovation today. And this is something we're really dealing with in the financial services markets. I'm sure all of you are well aware that everything is changing quickly. We're seeing new participants in our markets. We're seeing new market structures. And with new innovation, we always have to think about how we want to balance the good and the bad, the risks and the benefit. And this is something that we are thinking about every day at the CFTC. So back to the song I referenced, Welcome to the Future, more lyrics from that song. He says, look around, it's all clear. Wherever we're going, well, we're here. So many things I never thought I'd see happen right in front of me. Every day is a revolution. And I think we are facing a revolution in the financial markets. We've seen the rise and fall, and I guess rise again, of digital assets. We're seeing new technology used by the financial services industry, and we're seeing new market structures, as I mentioned. So the future is here. We're in the midst of it, and I think we all have to take some time to balance the benefits and the risks. And there's endless examples of this, but I'm going to just focus on two today. So the first I'm going to mention is the increase in retail participations in the derivatives market. So April is Financial Literacy Month. If you didn't know that, it is. And it seems like an important time to really start talking about this increase of retail participants in these markets. And it's not new. We've always had retail customers in the derivatives markets, but we're seeing a huge increase, I believe as much as 50% increase in some of our markets within the last year. And we have to ask ourselves, are we providing the right customer education? Are we ensuring that these individuals understand what they're participating in, what they're investing in? I don't have to remind anyone in this room that derivatives products are incredibly complex. They can involve a high degree of risk. If you're a commercial end user, they're great for hedging. If you are another market participant, a lot of times that risk is balanced by potential payoffs. And we want you in the market, we need that liquidity. But customers who are new to our markets, they need to properly understand how these products work. And they have to also understand that they can face losses beyond, what they would expect in a normal market. So I think to ensure customer protections, we have to focus on clear and transparent rules. At the agency, we have to look at targeted enforcement procedures and efforts to ensure that we are keeping the market safe, ensuring integrity, and trying to get those who are purposely committing fraud out of the market. But I think we probably need to start doing a little bit more. We do need to focus more on customer education. We need to make sure that we have in place information so that these new participants fully understand what they are investing in. And we have to warn them about scams. As I mentioned, it's Financial Literacy Month. Our Office of Public Affairs has been putting out a number of tweets just highlighting some of the more typical scams that we are seeing to make people aware of what's out there. And the more we can do that, the better our markets will be, because the retail participation isn't going away. It's not going to change. This is the future of our markets. So, and I know the customer education and protection is important to all of you in this room, and I know that you all are making efforts as well. And that, at the end of the day, will just make these markets more safe and more accessible. I would say I would just challenge you to continue doing so, but find new ways to reach those customers. Again, using social media, using, webcasts, podcasts, whatever you need to do to reach those individuals that are starting to get into the market. We need to just go find them where they exist and make sure they know what they're trading in and what they're investing in. And as a regulator, we certainly have a role that we have to play. We need to figure out how to reach these customers. And we also have to figure out how we can support our registrants and market registers, those who are registered in our markets, how we can support that customer education. And that's something that we will be looking into and trying to think about more at the CFTC. So because retail market participation is the future of our markets, I think the best thing we can do is just work together and partner in this space. That's probably working at the government stakeholders. The more we can work together, the more we can be a team, I think the better we'll be able to provide that education and hopefully some heightened level of customer protection, or at least heightened level of information to those new customers. The other thing I wanted to talk about today is just kind of a new, it's something new we're seeing at the CFTC. It's something new in the futures market generally. And it's an interesting new kind of setup to our market structure that I don't think we envisioned when the Commission originally implemented regulations to the Commodity Exchange Act and implemented regulations to address the core principles that are outlined in the Commodity Exchange Act. So one of the things we are seeing is this kind of vertically integrated markets. And what I mean by that is where we traditionally had we have intermediated markets. So you have a separate intermediary, we call it the FCM. They were one entity. Your clearing was another entity. Your exchange was another entity. And the regulations were set up to build safeguards and protocols into that market structure to make sure that there was integrity in the markets and to really just keep the system as a whole safe and make sure that the products are traded and cleared as safely and as efficiently as possible. But we're seeing some of them are new entrants where they are coming in and suddenly you have multiple registrations or multiple players in our space with the same entity, the same parent company. So it might be individual companies, but it's overall the same players, which I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. Maybe that is the future of our market structure. But what I am worried about is that our rules were not set up to manage that type of vertical integration in our markets. And we probably need to go back and look at our regulations and make sure that what's in place does give us the opportunity to live out or to fulfill our mission that the Congress gave us in the Commodity Exchange Act. Because as we see new entrants, new market structure, the idea that we can just assume that our regulations will work without any concerns, it's a dangerous place to be in. So I have encouraged the chairman, I've encouraged my colleagues to sit down and have a public forum, maybe a request for information, maybe we have a roundtable, something where we sit down and we go through the existing regulations and how they apply to the current market structure and what that looks like in these new vertically integrated markets. And if necessary, update them or make changes. It could be that everything's fine, but I think until we do that and we ask the questions and we engage stakeholders, I don't know if we can say that for sure. So I'm hoping that we take on this task, that we sit down and we engage stakeholders and the public and start having these conversations. Because we really do want to make sure that we have the protocols in place that keep those safety features in our markets that the traditional intermediated market structure had in mind. So that's something I'm hoping we'll work on. So in addition to the increased customer protection, customer education, I think we should spend some time looking at our existing regulations so that they fit new innovations, new market structures, and just do what we can to promote innovation, but make sure we're promoting it in a responsible manner. And that's really one of our key requirements for the agency under the Commodity Exchange Act. So with that, I'm actually going to end this just like I started, with Brad Paisley lyrics. Glory, glory, hallelujah, welcome to the future. So thank you guys again. And Julie Bauer is going to join me for a fireside chat. She's got some great questions planned, and hopefully we'll get into a few more issues and maybe go a little bit further on the issues I mentioned. So thank you for indulging me, and I welcome Julie to the stage.
I have to echo what others have said. Walk-up music is really fun. I think we'll make it a permanent feature. Well, thanks for joining us. We're really happy to have you here. It's always great to hear directly from folks in your seat, to give us a little peek behind the curtain of what's really going on. That's different from, what we read in the press every day. I do want to pick up first on retail. This is, we had a panel earlier today focused on this. We've had that panel for the last couple of years. It's, we've had a lot of growth in our industry. And I think all of the things that you said are things that we're grappling with as well. How do you meet these investors where they are? How do you update your educational efforts? How do you broaden that? And I do think partnerships are key. I think that what we've learned, at least, is that you can create the best content ever, but if you don't get it into the right place, that's a problem. So really, I think partnerships are great, and there is room to do more in terms of partnering with the agencies on that. I guess I'm curious, from the CFTC's perspective, what are the products in your area where you're seeing the most growth from retail?
So not surprisingly, digital assets, we're seeing a lot of retail participation in our derivatives related to digital assets. But what I think is surprising is we're also seeing it in other markets where there's a lot of liquidity, so oil, some of the agriculture commodity derivatives contracts. So we are seeing it kind of across the board. Mm-hmm. And again, it's that idea that, making sure people really understand what they're investing in. When you think about the whether it's oil or ag commodities, those derivatives really are meant to be, risk hedging and price discovery mechanisms. Obviously, right. We want the liquidity in there. So the more participation, the better. Mm-hmm. But the traditional use is hedging, and people are getting in there to try to, make money. And so, which is fine, but they need to understand they can also lose a lot of money. And right. That can happen quite quickly. So I think that's kind of the struggle, is we're trying to reach these new investors that, it's not just crypto investors.
Right.
It's across the board. And so where do we find these people? How do we make sure they're getting the information they need to safely participate in the derivatives markets?
Right. I think that the intermediary community on the securities side of the world has long been used to retail, particularly in the cash, right? Maybe not so much on the futures side, at least not back in the day when I was working in futures. So how are you seeing FCMs adapt to that? Are they stepping up what they're doing in terms of customer education? Are they surprised by the new entrants they're seeing?
I do think they're surprised. I think it's the onboarding process. It makes that so much more important to make sure that people right. know what they're getting into, know what's going to be required capital-wise, that they're going to have to, there's going to be margin that they have to put in and maintain. So mm-hmm. I think that piece of it, there's been a lot of education. I think, and I mentioned, and I think we'll probably get back to this again, but this vertical integration, what's been interesting is you see platforms, a lot of times, again, digital asset platforms that are used to retail participants. They are actively engaged with retail participants, becoming FCMs and really onboarding those customers into the derivatives market space. And it's very different. And so when we're talking and meeting with these folks, we have a lot of questions about how does that individual really know the difference when they're going from your platform that's just spot trading to derivatives trading. It's very different. And so what level of disclaimers are you providing? How are they accessing, if they're coming in through your website, how are they moving to your FCM? So there's just a lot of new things that we have to think about that we didn't before.
Right. I think, obviously market structure is a huge issue for those of us in options and securities right now. We had a panel yesterday going into great detail on the proposals that are out from the SEC right now. And one of the concerns we heard expressed about several of those is, I think Commissioner Crenshaw made a speech recently that, talked about sort of porting some of these over. And when you start to think about that, you realize the implementation problems that would happen. Yeah. So I think it's similar to what you're saying about, the way that you oversee one market structure or one product. It may not easily shift over to a new one, right? But how do you isolate the protections that you're trying to ensure are there, and what is the sort of group approach to managing the risk there? And I do think you make a good point about what's in front of you, because there is certainly, some of the shared risk management duties, I guess, are coming into a single, let's say, corporate entity or holding company. Has that posed challenges? Well, I know it has, but when you think about how people come to you and asking to do these things, I guess the door they have to come through is sort of the existing labels, right? Are you a DCO? Are you a DCM? Are you, which door are you coming through? So how are you managing that? How are you breaking that down?
What's been interesting is the way that, different registrants or registered entities come in the door. It is a little bit different. Some of that is actually done by NFA. And that's, mostly a separate process. So what we find is you might have someone coming in and applying to be a DCO, and you find out that they are already an FCM. Or, maybe they're in the process of becoming an FCM. And it just changes the dynamics of that conversation. Right. What does that mean for some of these regulations we have, where you're trying to make sure people are treated equally? You're trying to make sure the FCMs are treated equally when they're on the exchange and then in the clearinghouse. And so it just changes the nature of the conversations. I do think because, and again, this is in digital assets more so than anywhere else, because there's not a way for these markets to easily register, despite what the SEC says. There's not an easy process there, and there's really not a process at the CFTC either, because of our intermediated structure. And so they're trying to find ways to be regulated, to do what they're doing in a way that can give individuals some sort of comfort that they're being regulated. And again, I'm not saying that's wrong or right, but I don't think our regulations fit that. So I think we just have to just stop and think. And I don't even want to say take a step back, but in the process of this, we have to really look at what our regulations are trying to accomplish and how they're worded and how we expect people to comply with them, and make sure that it fits in this new market structure.
So on that topic, obviously crypto. There's so many questions, and we hear a lot of talk about it. We read a lot of stories about, the SEC's perspective, your perspective. Congress is involved. Obviously, the agencies report up to different committees in Congress. But I know there's a lot of work being done and a lot of conversations going on. Can you share with our audience a little bit of detail about what's really happening?
Yeah, so this is really timely because actually just last week I was up with the House of Representatives briefing the House Agriculture and House Financial Services Republicans on what we're seeing at the agency, and I was with Commissioner Peirce. So it was great because we both got to sit there and just take questions from members. And I think it was interesting to see the two committees work together. It's a little bit unusual. I think people always talk about the fact that Democrats and Republicans can't work together. I sometimes will say it's the committees. The House Agriculture Committee will go to great lengths to not have to deal with the House Financial Services Committee, and probably vice versa. So to see those committees coming together and trying to work through something that they can get into place is really, I think, a remarkable just kind of step towards in a direction to have some sort of regulatory framework here that will provide some clarity and fill some of the gaps. I think both Commissioner Peirce and I kind of encouraged them to put in some sort of mechanism that forces the CFTC and the SEC to come together and create a framework for how digital assets will be classified. I think if we leave that out of legislation, it's not going to provide the clarity that everyone wants. I also think if we were left to our own accord, we wouldn't get there. So this is one where we always say we don't want mandates from Congress, but this is one where I think Congress really needs to tell us to do this. But it's just been interesting seeing how this is starting to overcome barriers that have existed with legislators for a long time. So I always say, in this space, it's really not a Republican or Democrat thing. And now it's not even like a committee jurisdiction question. Everyone recognizes that something needs to be done, and they want to find a path forward that everyone can agree to. So conversations have been occurring quite a bit. Honestly, I could probably say I spend 80% of my time just talking about digital assets, which is amazing because it is kind of a small part of our portfolio. Yeah. But I think it just goes to show that people recognize there's a regulatory gap. There's a lot of retail participants that are, endangered. And if we don't do something, all the regulation, all the structure is going to come from enforcement. And that's not a good way to do this either, because then you end up with, there's no clarity whatsoever. And people who want to do right and follow the rules don't know how to do it and face an enforcement charge even when they've gone out of their way to try to do everything right. There's a lot of enforcement cases where they weren't trying to do things right. And I'm glad we are trying to get some of the fraud out of the system. Right. But we have to have a framework that fills these regulatory gaps, because otherwise it will get filled with court rulings and settlements and that sort of, approach.
Right. Yeah. And talk a little bit, I know the CFTC's always been very engaged with international counterparts. And I want to talk to you some about that and maybe just start with this issue. Yeah. I think, there's been, some of the commentary has been about, well, if we don't get our act together, right, this business is going to other jurisdictions. What sorts of conversations are you having with regulators in other jurisdictions? What is the alignment there? Is it similar to what you've just described that's happening domestically? Yeah,
and you're seeing it, with the EU and their recent policies, MiCA. Don't ask me what it stands for. We all call it MiCA. But you're seeing other countries realizing that there is a big gap here, that people are losing money, that it's dangerous not just for the participants, but overall to the overall financial system. And so everyone is trying to find a path forward. And, in talking to some of our regulators abroad, you see people from kind of different spectrums of how far along they are. I was talking to some of the regulators in Singapore, and they are working on a structure within Singapore, and obviously we've seen what the EU has been doing. I was just in Johannesburg, South Africa, talking to those regulators, and they are still in this stage of, do we just ban it, or is it too late to ban it? So then do we have to regulate it? So they're still trying to figure out what's the best path forward. So people are in various stages of handling this. But I think it's good that everyone is focused on it. And hopefully, because we talk with our regulatory counterparts, internationally, I'm hoping that there will be some best practices or idea sharing or something where not everybody's starting from scratch. And that's something we do a lot in the derivatives markets,
right,
where, there is some comparability across regulatory jurisdictions. So I think that's a good framework for what we're dealing with in digital asset space.
Yeah. And related, but in a more broad way in terms of your international engagement, I know we're unique in that we have the SEC and the CFTC. Most, maybe all other jurisdictions have a combined market regulator. So is that something that still proves to be a struggle, or has the international community just sort of gotten used to it and we all just move along?
There's still a lot of people very confused. Using the South Africa example, talking to them about crypto, and we ended up pivoting to cattle because they are a large cattle producing country, and we were talking about derivatives on cattle markets, and the woman was she's like, "You guys do that too?" And so we've got this really vast regulatory oversight, and I think it does confuse regulators to a certain extent. But what I also find is we have a depth of knowledge in our markets that they may not. So when you have one regulator over securities and commodities, derivatives markets, I think they're a little bit looking at this more, they're not as deep in the markets as we are. So what happens is we kind of become the experts in the room on the derivatives markets, and they really do rely on us to bring some of our expertise to these international conversations. So I think it's actually a good thing that we have the separate functions, that we aren't one regulator. The other thing that really confuses our international counterparts is the idea of a bipartisan commission. It just blows their mind.
Oh, interesting.
They are always very confused. They'll say, well, who works for who? And no, we're all independent. And it's just been interesting seeing them process that too, that we are independent commissioners. We work for ourselves. Yes, we have a chairman, but we also have our own opinions and staff, and we all approach this from our own perspective. So that's been another just part of that confusion that's been interesting to try to explain. Right.
So the others just generally have a chairman or director that's named, and that's it.
Yeah, and you'll see some, the EU has their boards, but I think this idea of, this bipartisan entity that with a lot of independence for each commissioner is somewhat is different.
Yeah.
But it works.
Yes. So over the past decade, I would say the perception certainly is that the market regulators and the banking regulators, who sometimes historically and even today don't see eye to eye, different priorities, but have been working together more. Both domestically and internationally. Is the uptick, I guess, as real as it seems from my vantage point? And what has come from that? Do you think there is an evolving or increasing understanding on both sides of the table about, how the two can work together?
Yep. it is increasing, and I think, recent market issues have made that even more apparent, things that people don't think about, but when the FDIC takes receivership of a bank, if that bank's a counterparty in a swap, how does that change the reporting? Do you need to now report that your counterparty is the FDIC? So, little things like that, and it forces us to reach out to the other regulators. It forces the other regulators to reach out to us to make sure that everything's seamless. So we've had a lot more conversations with the FDIC, not just with the recent kind of bank, downgrades and closures, but also just talking about resolution and recovery generally,
right,
and how that bankruptcy is handled for a registered entity at the CFTC, especially when they're a related bank. We work very closely with the Federal Reserve because of their role with some of our designated clearinghouses. So we work hand in hand with them. Capital formation, that's been a big area where we just have to be talking because one agency's rule can really upset the entire ecosystem. So we've had to be in closer contact there, and I think it's just one, you get to know the other regulators, but they also get an appreciation for what your role is. And we find at CFTC, because we're so small, it's easy for the other agencies to maybe not understand what we do or what our, where our markets fit in. So we've been dealing with, trying to help them understand our role and how to make sure that, their actions do not upset what we have going in our space.
Right. Well, let's take a step back a little bit. You've been in Washington for a while.
Yeah.
And you spent time on Capitol Hill before you entered the regulatory sphere. First of all, what drove your interest in public service? How did you end up doing this for a living?
Yeah. I'm from a family where, public service wasn't a, you should go out and help your neighbors. It just happened. It just happened every day. My dad would get up early and shovel the neighbor's driveway, or somebody's car would break down and you would just stop what you were doing and go pick them up. My grandparents, every election, would go work at the polls, and sometimes I would just, go along with them. So to me, it wasn't you should do this. It was just part of what we did every day. Mm-hmm. And really the way I ended up in Washington and on Capitol Hill, it goes clear back to in my youth. I grew up on a farm. Our nearest neighbor was about, 10, 15 miles away. And, it's hard to get together when you're that far away. So my mom would organize card games. So she'd invite neighbors, and again, neighbors would go as far as 30, 40 miles. She'd invite neighbors over once a month to play cards. And one of the women who played bridge with her was a state legislator in the South Dakota State Legislature. And I thought that was so fascinating as a kid, because you just didn't see a lot of female legislators. And so I was always asking her a lot of questions about her role and how she ended up doing that and how she decided to run for office. And she'd said to me, when you get old enough, call me. If I'm still there, you can be my page. So, and years went by, and when I got to be a senior in high school, I called her. She was still serving. And I spent, a full month of my senior year paging in the state legislature. So that was really where the interest sparked. That's when I knew,
right,
I want to be working in government. I want to be in public service. And then it just continued in college. I was an intern on Capitol Hill for 3 months during my senior year of college. And at that point, I just knew that, I had to be, this was the path for me. So it started at a young age, but I'm constantly reminded that I'm in DC. The reason I'm here is because I want to be in public service. I want to work for the government. I want to do what I can to hopefully improve policies that impact the rest of the country.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about the state legislator. So I guess when I think about the role that you're serving now, I mean, it's really demanding. And the universe of registrants has grown exponentially over the past decade for sure, maybe longer than that. How do you manage that? How do you keep the agency sort of staffed and energized to keep up with that pace?
Yeah, and we have an amazing staff at the CFTC, and they are truly experts in their space. But some of them are also getting closer to retirement, and so we have had a lot of discussions about, who's on the back bench, who are we training to take over for these industry experts that have been working at the agency for years. And that's something that, I think Chairman Benham has recognized is a potential problem. And so he has spent a lot of time on how are we going to better recruit at the agency? How are we going to recruit in a way that we're bringing in more diverse candidates? How are we going to get in the next generation of experts to make sure that we don't have kind of a loss of all this knowledge when folks retire? So he's put in place a number of he brought in a head of chief diversity officer who is spending a lot of her time on recruiting talent and ensuring once we get them in the door that we can retain that talent.
Right.
And I've been very supportive of that. And then I've also just my own initiative when I'm out traveling. A lot of times I'll reach out to an area university and find out if they have a class on derivatives markets or, just commodity markets, and then reach out to the professor and offer to come in and say hello. And then talk a little bit about the agency, talk about internship possibilities, and just trying to reach the next generation, because I don't think our agency really did that before. I don't think we thought about that, and we're in a place now where we really do have to be ready for, replacing those who have been the experts for so long, who may someday want to retire, rightfully
right.
so.
And to your earlier point, with all the innovation and the technological leaps, it's great to have new influx of people for whom a lot of the technologies are more native to them, to their experiences.
Yeah.
I think. I have a couple more questions, but I am going to see if we have audience questions when we have about 5 minutes left. So if you think about it, if you have some, we'll get back to you. So a fun thing, in my opinion, about the CFTC right now is of the 5 commissioners, the chair is Russ Benham. The other 4 commissioners are all women.
Yeah.
That's a first.
Yes.
And I think it's really interesting to see that evolution happening across these government agencies. I do feel that there have always been a lot of senior women in staff positions at the CFTC, but this is the first time for women in the chairs. So how has that been to be a part of that?
It's been exciting. And what I will say about the CFTC, we have this hallway with pictures of all the former commissioners, and it is surprising how many women are on that wall, and how many of them did serve as chair at one point in time. So I think if you go back historically, the CFTC has, I think, had an unusual number of women in high-level positions,
Agree.
Commissioner and chair. But certainly this is the first time where we've been a majority. I think, I don't think about it as much as, having 4 women come in at one time as just 4 new people coming in at one time.
Right.
That has been interesting, just being part of this what feels like a very new commission. Usually there's a little less. Usually the turnovers of terms work in such a way where you're usually not replacing that many commissioners at one time. So certainly working through kind of everybody's different styles, positions, the way we all view things a little bit differently. I think it's been fun. I'm not sure the chairman thinks it's been fun, but I do say sometimes I think he has the hardest job because not only does he have this new commission, but he has 4 very, very opinionated and it's women who have very distinct positions on issues and who are not afraid to speak out, which is great, but it does make things difficult to get. It gets harder to get stuff done.
You're certainly right. Typically, you wouldn't see that many new commissioners coming on board at the same time. So I do think that's a bit of a unique circumstance and challenge. Yep. You would usually be doing it, one by one. So one thing I like to talk about sometimes is what I will call how it really feels in Washington. Yeah. I think with the news coverage and polarization in politics today, a lot of people who do not spend time working on public policy issues or working with, those in Washington have a very different view than what I experience in my day-to-day. Right? I see a lot of really talented people working very hard and thinking deeply about really hard questions, like some of the ones we've talked about today. I think there are so many really wonderful across the aisle friendships and collaborations going on. These are not the things that get the headlines, but I do think they're the things that I enjoy as part of my work all the time in Washington. And I think given the different positions you've held, it would be great if you could share some of your experiences in that regard.
And going back to the international regulators, we get this question all the time. How do you guys get anything done in Washington? Because as far as everyone else knows, it's just a giant party fight. Republicans versus Democrats. Nobody wants anyone to get anything done. And, we're at this complete standstill all the time. And I always try to remind people, what they're seeing is what makes a good news story. So when you have a 24-hour news cycle, the stories that you're going to see in the news are the conflicts that will sell, that will bring viewers. And so you're not seeing the partnerships. You're not seeing the cooperation and the coordination. You're not hearing about the bills that got through Congress on a bipartisan level with a bipartisan, with a vote that was, almost unanimous, because that's not very interesting. So, what is fed through the media is definitely the more controversial, aspects of being in Washington. But I mean, even as I was on the Hill for 15 years, and the senator I worked for, one of his best friend, I wouldn't say best friend, but the person he talked to every single day was Chuck Schumer from New York, because they both worked out. They were both on the treadmill every morning. Right. They would have conversations. They'd talk about policy, and that was a constant conversation they were having. Right. So to say that, the Republicans and Democrats are never talking, they're never working together, that's not at all the case. They are. They have no choice. They have to be working together. Right. And when I look at our commission, we talk all the time. I spend a lot of time with my Democrat counterparts. You realize at the end of the day, we're not that different. We have kids, we have families, we're pulled in a million directions. We're just trying to understand whatever's in front of us. And it's not a partisan fight. It's more, okay, how can we get something done together, and understanding where each other is coming from and appreciating those differences and trying to figure out a path forward. So I think there is a lot of cooperation and bipartisanship in Washington. And I always again, going back to like visiting the universities, I always try to encourage students, don't be discouraged about what you see in the press, because it is a good place to work, and you don't have to be, on one side or the other. We all do get along, and it's not a toxic environment as people like to believe, or at least report that it is.
Right. And the issues that you're dealing with and we're all dealing with, honestly, they're not partisan issues. They're not the fodder of that. And it's really interesting, I think, too, when you see commissioners who have come from Capitol Hill. Lots of times you've worked together on so many large pieces of legislation where agreements have to be reached, and the fun of it is, how do you work the puzzle? How do you solve the puzzle, right? And I think it's a good training ground for what you have to do as a commissioner when, you're balancing all the different interests. It's a mix of concerns, but I think for me, my day-to-day experience with Washington is a good one, and doesn't bear a lot of resemblance to what people's perceptions or what they see on the news is. All right, so before we run out of time, are there any audience questions? I'm looking.
I always joke, I'll answer any questions. I've got 4 kids, and I can only tell you what questions I get. I can't even explain the questions I get at the dinner table, so feel free to make something up.
Jim has one. They're coming with a mic, Jim, so maybe just wait so other people can hear.
I can repeat it, too.
Are they on the treadmill in the morning?
No. Although I think they are both runners. I don't think...
repeat the question, because I think we didn't get it.
So the question had to do with whether or not the chairman of the CFTC and the SEC, what their relationship is like, and do they have that friendship? Again, just another interesting, from the same party. They're both Democrat chairmen. But I think they have very different views on the world. And sometimes that is hard to bridge. So I don't know that they have the type of relationship that, say, if you just go back even to previous chairman Heath Tarbert, he was very close with Jay Clayton. They talked all the time. I don't think it's that same relationship. But, I don't think either one of them has said, I'm not going to work with that person. It's just not a natural relationship.
Right.
And we have found that, I work with Commissioner Peirce really well. Christy Goldsmith-Romero used to be at the SEC, and she works with a lot of the commissioners there really well. So I think we've found other relationships that help kind of bridge that gap, but I don't think that it's the relationship at the head is not as close as it has been in the past.
I think also one of the interesting things that's happened in more recent years is you've seen more staff going between the agencies, and that has been really helpful. To have people who sort of speak the other language, so to say. I think that's been a really good thing. And I think more understanding between the two has developed. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and we were seeing that a lot with our enforcement divisions until recently. So I would say, the enforcement divisions between the two agencies worked very well together, kind of knew how to team up on their cases, how to, make sure that everybody, everything was covered and they worked together. That has changed too. And you will see it. You will see, whether it's one agency getting out in front of the other, filing a case saying that some digital asset is a security or a commodity. Or we even had a recent case where, the SEC filed an amicus brief saying that to support somebody who's trying to throw out a case where they claim that we don't have jurisdiction. So this is new. This is a new era, and it's unfortunate. And hopefully we find a way to get past this, because I don't think it's serving anyone to have this kind of conflict.
Are there any more questions in the audience? I have one more, but I want to give a chance. Right here.
My question goes back to the beginning when you said you saw a lot of growth in digital assets. My question is, right now everything's done through enforcement, but then is there ever a concern that if you create a construct around it, that you end up legitimizing all of it?
That is a great question, and that actually came up a number of times when I was meeting with the House Agriculture and Financial Services members, because there is a real fear on Capitol Hill that by creating a regulatory structure, we're just legitimizing a business that a lot of people still believe is just there for corruption, there to, money launder and hide funds. And I agree. I do think that that's a valid question and something that we have to think about very carefully. But what we're seeing and what I fear is the interest is there, the participants are there, people are investing their money, and they're figuring out how to do it. They figured out how to get a VPN scrambler and log on to these exchanges that are offshore that are not supposed to have U.S. customers participating. They are getting around those rules. So by saying we're not going to allow it, we're almost creating more risk because we have no oversight of those companies that are offshore. And we can't do anything until the fraud has happened and we bring an enforcement case. And by then the money's long gone. So I do think it's not so much legitimizing it, it's giving some sort of, safe space for people who really want to be in this market to do so. And I'm hoping that that's what we're able to accomplish through some sort of new framework, is that we are creating a safe space for this trading to happen, because it's going to happen regardless. And I would rather know what's happening. I'd rather see the data. I'd rather know the volume of trading. I'd rather see that information than just try to interpret what's happening, in all these offshore exchanges.
All right, Commissioner, we have run over,
yeah,
as I thought we might. Thank you so much for being here. It's been great to talk to you. We're glad that you could join us. And everyone, we will let you go get your lunch.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank her.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.